Classical and Labeling Theories Assessment 3. This presentation serves to examine and compare two major schools of criminological thought, classical theory and labeling theory. The individual attributes, their strengths and their weaknesses will all be outlined for the express purpose of indicating major differences in the respective theories, disproving the assertion that all theories of criminology, old and new, are essentially the same. So, what are the fundamental aspects of these theories? The fundamentals of classical theory, as written by Cesare Beccaria, are proportional punishment to the crime, clearly established laws, and straightforward application of punishment when those laws are broken. All of these factors were intended to address both unruly criminals and capricious jurors. This was all understood to operate with the purpose that you wouldn't be tortured or killed for any transgressions, but instead fairly tried and placed into prison. The fundamentals of labeling theory are individuals who are stigmatized or alienated by society will adopt deviant behaviors that adhere to the labels projected onto them by society and undergo the self-fulfilling prophecy, or a sort of negative transformation of the self. This transformation typically manifests itself in a set of identifiable deviant behavior and attitude criteria. So, what are the key differences? The key differences between these theories are resonant of the eras that they were created in. For instance, the classical theory application of punishment is direct, clear, and straightforward because the punishments that existed in the 18th century were often unclear, inconsistent, and rather brutal. Labeling theory, especially the ideas of stigma, became mainstream with partial thanks to the cognitive revolution of the 50s and 60s and sought not to punish but to understand. Since one of the theory's largest contributors, Irving Goffman's focus was how individuals in society eventually become deviants, to examine how labels can turn individuals to deviant behavior, which leads to another key difference that classical theory has little meaningful affiliation with psychology since it had no intentions of examining the minds of criminals and therefore gave a somewhat blunt answer to the question, how can we address rampant crime if torture and death don't seem to be working? So the most direct way to address the differences would be to acknowledge that there's no easy way of comparing them and just to put them side by side. So classical theory focuses on deterrence and punishment, labeling does not. Labeling theory identifies potential criminals via their past treatment, stigmatization, and indicators of deviance. Classical theory has no such distinguishing factors towards individuals. Rather, all criminals and or potential criminals are universally alike in that way. It is simply the engaging in the crime that differentiates them from others. So what are the pros of these theories, or the positives? Of labeling theory, it almost demands a sympathetic understanding of perpetrators as people who've been wronged in one way or another. The central ideas of stigma, deviance, mental health, discredited attributes, and the labels therein can all play an integral part of an individual sense of self. When labeling theory is considered as part of the conversation behind crime and individuals who commit crimes, it can ask society to think more openly about rehabilitation and prevention of crime. It also importantly acknowledges that an individual is more than their labels, and as such, they are more than their crimes. The pros of classical theory come in the clearly defined and proportional consequence of crime, abolition of torture, syndication of police, and the absence of arbitrary capital punishment. These serve as the foundational components of criminal justice in both the United States and in Europe. Furthermore, classical theory was instrumental in the reassessment of criminal law and sociology of its time. So what are the cons of these theories? Labeling theory detractors tend to note the deterministic nature of labeling theory in that once deviance has been identified, intervention is essential in preventing further undesirable deviant behavior, which is also criticized for absolving agency from deviance. It's further argued that labeling theory somewhat ironically assigns victimhood to deviance automatically, thus revoking victimhood that justifiably belongs to the victim of the deviant's actions. Classical theory, it implements punishment without nuance, since it assumes all individuals who commit crimes are wholly aware of the crimes they commit, by asserting that individuals are competent, rational, and that crimes are essentially premeditated and knowingly committed by those who commit them. Furthermore, classical theory failed to consider the rampancy of crime in low income areas. Moreover, the external factors that cause individuals of low socioeconomic backgrounds to commit crime, such as lack of employment or poverty that necessitates crime. So, in conclusion, classical and labeling theories both still exist in contemporary society and have been instrumental in the development of contrasting perspectives of criminology. The theory's disparate positions in the field of criminology understandably have little overlap. As indicated previously in the presentation, they're not reasonably compared to one another due to their fundamental differences in application and intent. So I hope that this indicates and definitively concludes that these different theories of criminology are not essentially all the same. Thank you very much.